Good morning, good morning. My name is Reginald Reeves, and I'm here with the attorneys from Justice League Law Group. To my right is the lovely Christian Reeves.
Hello, everyone.
And to my left is the amazing Jessica Tellurian.
Buenos dias.
And this is episode 3 of the Full Coverage Podcast. Now, ladies, it's just after New Year, and with the New Year bringing new laws, and some laws are controversial. Some laws come to effect by referendum where the people vote on, and sometimes it comes through state or federal legislatures. And one law that struck out at me recently, and as I was reading the news, was this law in New York that was allowing, as of January 1st, 2019, New Yorkers to identify as gender X. It allows them to gender their babies, their newborn babies, as gender X, and it allows adults to change their gender to X as well. So that's very interesting because with that can bring a lot of different legal issues that come with that, especially when it comes to what happens with those children and those people when they try to participate in sports, what schools they go to, when they cross state lines, full faith and credit. Will other states honor this new gender? Are we headed towards a new third gender?
Okay, so first, one thing that I think that we need to also address is that this is not New York, it's the city of New York City alone. So from my understanding of full faith and credit, it would be giving, full faith and credit to something from another state, whereas this is not a state enacted policy, it's only New York City. So that's why they can have birth certificates that have the X on them, but actually for their driver's licenses, they still have to have their typical assigned sex because the state of New York requires a doctor to sign off on a note saying that, now you're a female or now you're whatever it is.
And I think that's important because this particular law is no doctor sign.
Right. Yeah.
Right, because before you had to have gender reassignment in order to have an X or to change your gender. So now they don't need that. You can just, as an adult, go and say that you do identify as gender X. You don't want to be classified, and you'll be able to change that as well as putting X on your child's birth certificate. So, there are some factors that come in with that as well, because by the time the child is able to choose their gender, would it be on their permits? Like, where would it be at?
I guess my concern, my interest in it is New York is following some other states. So according to the article, I think it was an ABC article, it was some states like California, Oregon, Washington. They're also offering gender-neutral birth certificates. Also,
New Jersey is following suit in February, so they'll be offering the gender X as well. And I thought it was kind of, ironic that this is our third episode, and they call it a third gender. So that's pretty interesting.
So what does that mean under the law? Like, will the law evolve to keep up with the current trends of states having a third gender? Like, will there be a third gender bathroom? Will there be third gender sports? Like, how far will the law go in places, state to state? And obviously, the politics of different states, like the South versus the Northeast versus the West Coast, would all be different. So at some point, I can foresee the Supreme Court, at some point, somebody's going to challenge this, and it's going to go into a federal level. So, I mean, where is this all going how will the children affected by this deal with this when they don't know what their gender is legally? Well,
I think that, it will most likely affect them, like, as far as, when they're growing up in bathrooms. Which bathroom are they going to go to? Are they going to be kind of insecure about which bathroom they should choose? And the other thing that people are doing is they're having gender neutral bathrooms. So that's how they're, combating that. And, in sports, or if you have an all-girls school or all-boys school, how would that come into play? Like, what would exactly happen in that situation? And also, people traveling with passports in international countries, some countries will, they'll have a problem with your gender being X on there. In Jamaica and in Uganda, where, LGBT is illegal, they could...
Go ahead.
Oh... What I was saying was the LGBT is illegal in those countries, and it could, subject them to arbitrary detention or scrutiny at the airports, and that could be degrading to someone, if that were to happen. So they can flag you at the border because that's their laws. They don't have to follow, the American laws. They're not as, equal. So
Wow,
that would be another issue too.
Right, that's an interesting point. But once again, that step probably wouldn't be an issue until the United States, because a passport obviously is a federal document. At some point, would the United States allow you to put that on your passport? I think we're a long way from that, but possibly, depending on who is elected, who's in power, we could be going into that direction.
You know what I was kind of thinking of, that it's not exactly what you guys are talking about, but it just made me think of when you're talking about internationally. A lot of languages, like for example in Spanish or French, when you use like a lot of the words, like the nouns, they'll be specific for masculine and feminine. So just like if this was to become something that expanded beyond the United States and was to go into countries that spoke in languages that specified based on gender, masculine and feminine, I would just wonder how that would come into play. Like, would we stop having L and La? Would we just use one or the other? Or, would there become a new term that we use to kind of signify how that word is going to end or how it's going to start?
Well, we got to roll with the punches. So, let's get back to the full faith and credit and what crosses state lines. I think a lot of people in regular life, they don't understand. Like, it takes a lot of interaction and work between separate states. Each state is its own sovereignty, and we're united up under the United States of America. So when it comes to documents crossing state lines, like what driver's licenses, barber's licenses, all these different type of documents that cross. Will your gender cross with you when you travel from place to place?
I think kind of like what we were talking about as far as with the full faith and credit doctrine. That originally was just more so intended to make sure that people pay their debts, and it's been taken a lot further than that. But as far as, we look at things that might apply in one state, like for example, your concealed carry permit, your like our bar license, we're right next to Georgia, and we have to retake the bar if we want to be licensed to practice in Georgia. If you're a beautician, the license for that, barber. There's so many different licenses, and your driver's license is also another license. And so just to assume that automatically you would have a license in one state because you have a license in another state, we've accepted that we aren't able to just take licenses in certain aspects and bring them over to another state. But on hot button issues...
I really wish that I can practice law
in
every state without having to take the bar.
And having to give people half of them.
Right. So what states will it turn into an ideology type of each state decides at some point? Once again, the federal government might have to step in on this issue.
Right. Well, the other thing is if the parents do choose to have a gender neutral child and put gender X on the birth certificate, when is this child able to choose which, if they do want to choose, which side they necessarily want to be on? How would that affect them? Would it be when they get their permit? Would they have to be emancipated in order to go ahead and revisit their birth certificates? Like, how would that work?
Saying basically, like when they get their driver's license, their own identification.
Right.
Would they have to stick to the gender that their parents?
Right.
Assigned?
It's like, would they still say, hey, I want to be gender X, or will they be like, hey, you know what? I identify more with a female. I identify more with the male. How would that actually play out? That's my question.
I think that's such an interesting point that you guys just raised, because it's kind of like ironic. On the one hand, they came up with the third gender so that people that perhaps feel as if they don't fit into one of the binary gender constructs of male or female would have another option. And then it would seem like, I don't know, going completely against the whole purpose to then basically like force this child that now is of the age to decide where they see themselves, to say, no, you have to stick with this gender. But then if you allow it to be fluid and allow them to shift from X to maybe female to male or however it would be, then that kind of begs the question is, would there be any limitation?
But then my thing is, the child may want to choose, the child might not have the same views as the parents. So it's kind of like the parents are choosing this for the children, like, you're going to be gender X and that's it. So it's kind of like the child is going to have to come to some type of conclusion, like what they want to identify with, if they wanted to.
I get what you're saying, Jessica, because the purpose maybe is probably behind adults or kids that don't necessarily identify with the gender that they were born with, and you're giving them an out. But now the law has went too far, because it could be boxing in kids who wouldn't have that issue in the first place, and now you're creating a new issue as well as getting rid of one. So you're robbing Peter to pay Paul on this issue. And will the law give some outs for kids? Because kids typically up under the law don't have a voice, and you got to do what your parent says. And that you see that with just the way kids are dressed. Like we all seen kids dressed as the opposite gender, and there's nothing under the law that a non-parent can do, even if that child doesn't necessarily want to do that, and there's no out for that child. So what would be any safeguards for a child that's born necessarily like a female, but the parent has X, and then that child, if the laws change and that child can't participate in female activities, that would be a drastic effect on the child. And not to mention, what about family law? As an attorney that's done some family law, imagine the issues that's going to cause in the area of family law when you got one parent that wants the child to be X, and then the other parent doesn't want the child to be gender neutral. I can only imagine the court cases that's going to flow from that. Because a lot of times, say you got a mother and father who's not married, the mother say, I want my child to be gender X, and then the father comes in later, files for paternity, and then they want to change your last name, and I want to change your gender. So,
even in the hospital room, if the parents aren't married, they might be sparring, and then they're like, I want her to be gender X, I want her to be F. So that causes a whole nother issue at that point.
Well, that was a very interesting conversation, guys, and I'm this is a very important topic, and we look forward to your comments, how you feel about the issue in general, how you think the laws would be, and for any special comments, anybody that stick out, I'm gonna give a free pack of Justice League Law Group playing cards for all
top of the line, by the way,
for all your cookout needs, and got the big joker there with the Justice League Law Group logo on there.
Nice.
For the all relaxing attorney needs. We also got a mug. I might give this mug out to somebody as well as Justice League mug. But thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Comment.
Like and subscribe below, guys.
Gender X babies.
Comment. Bye.